Dragon's Dogma 2 is the sequel to the first original game that came out back then on PS3 and Xbox 360, but also was given an update version on PS4, Xbox One, and also the PS3 360 retrospectively, and of course on PC and then later on the Nintendo Switch. Now, for whatever reason, when I first played Dark Horizon, I just couldn't even get into the game itself. I just felt like the combat in general was just repetitive, and the difficulty balancing was just unbalanced, to say the least, and I had like a terrible experience with the game itself. But for whatever reason, most people I've been seeing have been begging for a sequel to a game, which I just felt like was mediocre at best. So when I heard it was getting a sequel, I just decided to get myself a different game, and at the time I was right, because the game was having frame rate problems on the PC and everything. And look, I just wasn't a fan of the first game, and I had no plan to getting the sequel whatsoever. But then when Dragon Age Veilguard came out, and I was thinking about getting it at one point before it came out, I saw the previews of the combat and I thought it was okay, and I wasn't going to give it a chance until I even saw more previews. Terrible dialogue, generic characters, and some of the most dumbest things that doesn't make Dragon Age Dragon Age. It was such a huge downgrade in terms of character design, writing, and some questionable inclusions in the game that was never in the original series. And most people just insulted the game by calling it a Disney reject version of Dragon Age. So someone said Dragon's Dogma 2 also came out this year. I was debating if I really wanted to give the game a chance. Considering the first game experience, I just couldn't deal with it because the combat, in my own personal view, was just terrible at best. It just felt janky and whatever. It just felt like the game wasn't even finished or polished. When the game was on sale, I decided to give it a try. So I played it on the Xbox Series, and so I decided to just give it a try then. So you start by creating your character and playing around with whichever class you want to play around or whatever. You could be a warrior, a mage, or whatever. And you can also create your first pawn, which is going to be your key partner in the game itself. Now the thing is that you can actually upgrade yourself by spending points in the guild to earn some new skills, as well as upgrading your existing ones, as well as upgrading the seekers or your pawns, well, attributes and whatever. Well, you don't upgrade your attributes, you upgrade the skills, but you get what I mean. You can also, when you play as your classes and whatever, you can rank up fully, and you can actually unlock other parts of the classes. Like you could be like this little class where you can be some sort of warrior or whatever, and you can hold big giant great swords or hammers or whatnot, and you could do that. But the big problem that you guys might have with the getting all that is that everything just seems to cost too much money in the game. But whenever you keep doing quests, you'll earn some money, and you'll easily find money in chests, enemies, and more. And there's plenty of places to explore, so you can basically just play however you want. But then, once you keep upgrading yourself, or perhaps get some new weapons or whatever, you'll feel like you're pretty much unstoppable. I think I was almost level 40 at that point. And then I finally beat the game by beating the final boss. I had a feeling that was the final boss, but again, I wasn't sure if there was more content afterwards. Considering I know how fantasy open world games are, as they can be a bit long, but this surprisingly didn't even take long for me to beat at all, which I was pretty much shocked. There's plenty to do in the game if you really want to, but finding the side content in my view was a little bit difficult. But at the same time, you can find them around towns or just walk to a person, whatever, they'll give you something to do. You go against like goblins in the combat and whatever, wolves, lizard, reptiles or whatever, giants like a griffin, a freaking whatever. Who looks like Bigfoot, but it's not Bigfoot, but he looks like a werewolf, Bigfoot, I like to call him, or something, and an ogre, but also a dragon. But dragon, I highly advise you guys avoid unless you really have the best gear, because the dragons have some of the largest health meters that you'll ever encounter. But at the same time, they have some pretty good rewards. But I highly advise you guys just to stick to fighting some of the earlier giants, like the ogre, for an example, as the ogre is pretty easy. But there's also some variations of the ogre where they'll have like armor, but they can be easily cut if you go to the back of the armors and whatever. But you can also like go on top of them, give them a big giant stab. You could do this by grabbing them, or you can just stand on top of them. Doesn't really matter, but make sure you know what you're doing. Stamina is part of the key, and you're gonna want to make sure you conserve it. But if you somehow drain, then some of your allies will definitely help you around everything else too. But nighttime is where it's mostly dangerous when it comes to traveling, because there are more powerful enemies at night, which can make your experience, well, more difficult. I also want to say that if you're going to play on easy difficulty, only 2 achievements are disabled during that point. So if you really want to play with the other achievements you're trying to earn, you're going to have to play normal difficulty. I don't make the rules here. But I will go on to say is that I do find the game having improved combat, which I do find the combat a lot, well, somewhat easier than the first game itself. But at the same time, I just wish the game had a lock-in system, so that way I can find the enemies instead of swinging around the camera in order to find my enemy to fight. But you can fast travel with an ox, but sometimes you might get ambushed. You can also set up camps in certain areas too, but again, you might get ambushed depending on the sets that you have. But you can cook some food at least too, so you can give you and some of your buddies some attributes. And look, if you really need help, there's also some pawns you can hire by using a separate currency in the game. Now look, you don't need to use real life money. It's not forcing you to do nothing that people always sitting there and crying about, that always try to say like, oh, it's unplayable because microtransactions. I don't see Capcom shoving it in people's faces like EA does every freaking day. But for whatever reason, there also are YouTuber pawns in the game. Some of the YouTubers did say they got mixed reception on the game, and others say they like it. I don't know if they like it because they're in the game itself, and that will just probably be the key thing that might turn people off. But there are some pawns you can get for free, or some you have to pay. I will say too, there were some abilities that caught me off guard by one of my companions throwing me up in the air and landing on a giant, which I thought was pretty hilarious. But each of the pawns have like their own different attributes, spells, or at least just some sort of like ways they fight people or whatever. And they have their own class too, so make sure you know what class you really want before you hire the person or thing that you really need. And make sure you check on the level progression of the character too. Only you and your companion buddy will only level up, not the other pawns you'll hire later on. But yeah, in conclusion, I just didn't buy the hype when the game came out, and I just didn't understand why people were hyped into the game. And look, I like Shadow of the Colossus, and I always thought it was a cool part of the game, and that was the only thing I can always think about when it comes to the Dragon Dogma series, but that was just the only thing that stuck out to me the most. Everything else, I just didn't have a memorable experience, but this game isn't too bad or anything else like that. But I will just say is that I highly recommend you guys playing this game performance mode, and that's just about it. But yeah, there is fast traveling in the game, but you're gonna need to use a special coin next to one of those stone things or whatever, and that's it. I think they're pretty rare to get, but there are duplicates you guys can probably get in the game. But yeah, that's another thing to do, make duplicates of other items that you can probably use for other stuff. But if you guys like medieval adventure fantasy games, then I say, well, give this game a shot. But if you really want to dig deep, then whatever. Maybe you might find reasons why I just couldn't stick to the first game so long and whatever.